of the symbiotic partnership between humans and their technical.
Welcome everyone. This is Billy Adams, and thank you for taking the time to join me in this exploration of the symbiotic partnership between humans and their technical progeny. Our journey begins with a visit with nature, to gain insight into the power of symbiotic relationships. Next, we'll look into the mirror to study human physical and mental abilities, and go back in time to understand how our history with technology has enhanced those abilities, and enabled the human experience. Finally, we'll explore the forces shaping the human-technology partnership and their impact on the future of work and human activity. Now, please join me in welcoming our correspondent in Australia, Addison Nelson, who will lead us on a dive into how partnerships between the smallest creatures can lead to big things.
Thank you, Billy. And hello from down under. You might remember studying an animal called the hydra in high school biology, or seeing one of these squiggly creatures attached to a rock in your local frog pond. Millions of years ago, an ancestor of the hydra began making its own rock from calcium dissolved in seawater. Working together, trillions of these tiny creatures built structures that we call coral reefs, some of which can become quite massive, like the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Queensland, Australia, the world's largest living structure, big enough to encompass all 4 nations of the United Kingdom. This engineering feat was achieved by the mutually beneficial relationship between tiny coral and even tinier zooxanthellae algae, a partnership begun 200 million years ago. Like all hydras, coral have tentacles that grab microscopic prey and bring it into the mouth. The tentacles contain layers of cells, some of which harbor nasty little harpoons called nematocysts, with which the coral stuns and captures its prey. Living within other tentacle cells are the coral's symbiotic partner, the zooxanthellae algae. Since symbiotic relationships benefit both partners, what do the algae get from the coral? First, the coral provide protected living quarters at shallow, sunlit depths. Additionally, the coral provide water and carbon dioxide ingredients for sugar production from photosynthesis. So, what do the coral get from the algae? One benefit is oxygen, a byproduct of photosynthesis, which the coral animals breathe. And, most importantly, the coral gets sugar produced by the algae, which accounts for 95% of coral's energy needs. Unfortunately, this successful partnership is now in danger. Warming oceans are causing the algae to abandon the coral, depriving it of a vital energy supply, and turning the coral white in an often fatal condition called coral bleaching. Without their symbiont partner, the corals starve to death. The death process can be quite rapid. Shown here is the 8-month progression of a stand of staghorn coral from good health to bleached, where the symbiotic algae have left the coral, and finally death, as different form of algae grow on the remnants of the coral skeletons. Considering that coral reefs are home to 1/3 of all marine fish, their loss can have a devastating impact on food availability, fishing industries, tourism, and protection the reefs provide from storm surges. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important topic. I hope you come away with a better understanding that, although symbiotic relationships can achieve great things, those achievements are not invulnerable. This is Addison Nelson reporting from Cooktown, Australia. Back to you, Billy.
Thank you, Addison. Although the relationship between humans and technology differs from those in nature, our mutual benefits and dependence clearly adhere to the definition of symbiosis. Albert Einstein shared his optimistic view of the complementary skills of humans and technology when he said, "Computers are incredibly fast, accurate and stupid. Humans are incredibly slow, inaccurate and brilliant. Together they are powerful beyond imagination." There are also those who worry we are becoming too dependent on our technology, like Bill Joy, founder of Sun Microsystems, who warns, "We may reach a stage where decisions necessary to keep the system running will be so complex that human beings will be incapable of making them intelligently. At that stage, the machines will be in effective control. People won't be able to just turn the machines off, because they will be so dependent on them that turning them off would amount to suicide." It is this two-edged sword that we must wield carefully as humans and technology evolve together. Now, let's take stock of what humans bring to our relationship with technology. For discussion, we group our abilities into two dimensions. The first includes our body's physical and sensory abilities, and the second encompasses the cognitive and social capacities of our minds. Among the physical, are those abilities that allow us to move, lift, and, thanks to our opposable thumbs, grasp things like tree branches and screwdrivers. We are a dexterous species, able to manipulate objects in intricate patterns. And we do all those things while maintaining our balance. Some animals are faster, stronger and more nimble, but we humans have a versatile athleticism that has served us well over the millennia. One area where we excel is our ability to vocalize. Although birds and whales can sing, they don't compare to humans. As the Estonian composer Arvo Pärt said, the human voice is the most perfect instrument of all. We also stand out in our ability to express emotions like anger, sadness and joy through our facial expressions. There is evidence that these expressions are universal across different cultures. Last, but not least, is our ability to reproduce and evolve, a key difference between humans and technology, at least for now. Our bodies would wander aimlessly without input from our senses. Although there are 21 or more proposed senses, we all agree on the basic 5: seeing, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. We add here a sixth sense called proprioception, that allows us to know our body position and allows us to perform our favorite dance moves. As with physical abilities, our senses fall short of those in many species. An eagle sees 5 times better, and dogs smell 10,000 times better than humans. For the most part, humans are in the middle of the sensory pack. Some animals have other senses key to their survival. Bats and dolphins possess sonar that allows them to see with sound waves. Sharks have cells in their snouts that sense faint electric fields given off by other fish. When a fish swims by, those cells send signals to the shark's brain letting it know, it's time to eat. As we postulate on how technology can automate senses, it's worth considering abilities found elsewhere in nature to enable us to do things never imagined. Turning to the mind, we encounter capacities that make humans unique. First are the basic cognitive abilities, paying attention, comprehending and recalling what we have learned. Next, we are able to analyze, make decisions and apply knowledge to new situations, and then communicate that knowledge with others and create new works, either practical or artistic. Lastly, we recognize our most advanced social abilities, like situational awareness, perception and interacting with others. We express our personalities and persuade others. And, perhaps our highest capacity, is the ability to imagine and feel love. This list of human abilities is certainly incomplete and debatable, but it does serve as a template for the broad categories defining human activity, both work and play. Now, please join me in welcoming Professor Arthur Higginbottom, who will employ this template in an evolutionary view of our relationship with technology.
Thank you, William, and welcome to all from St. Andrew's Hall in Chesterton. It's my pleasure to take us on a brief ride in the Wayback Machine to 2 million years ago, when humans first began teaching nature to do useful things. Things like chipping flint to teach it to stab and cut, or wood and stone, to chop and pound. Along the way, we discovered fire, a key factor in releasing nutritional value in the food we gathered and hunted. The increase in available calories gave a boost to our brain development and cognitive abilities, allowing us to document primitive life in cave paintings, and translate our curiosity of how the world works, into symbols of our beliefs in the fertility of Mother Earth. This long period of human development, coupled with an increasing array of tools, enabled key advances, not just survival, but migration and occupation of all habitable locations on Earth. Perhaps the most important takeaway was the development of language, allowing humans to pass on accumulated knowledge, from generation to generation. The oldest known example of which is the 60,000-year-old songlines of Australia's Aboriginal peoples. These oral maps allowed generations of these early humans to navigate vast distances, across lands and seas. A new era began 12,000 years ago when humans tamed nature's means of production with the advent of farming and animal domestication, aided by advanced metal tools. The result was a never-seen abundance of relatively reliable food. With this newfound abundance, humans began to stratify into primary providers, the farmers, and upper classes with time to devote to organizing and inventing. The need to manage production drove the development of number systems, mathematics, and writing. For the first time, human knowledge was recorded and shared across distant realms and time, albeit at a slow pace. The earliest texts did not always contain sage wisdom or epic sagas. Instead, most were mundane details of daily life, like the 4,000-year-old Babylonian recipe for lamb stew which you could prepare in your kitchen for tonight's supper. As populations grew, the need to protect the fruits of labor led to the first codified laws. And the need for cohesion among the citizenry gave way to a progression of philosophies, gods, and religions. Civilization was born. A mere 600 years ago, the previously slow progress of humankind began to accelerate. With the invention of movable type, the speed with which knowledge could be disseminated increased by orders of magnitude. Whereas previous eras were powered by renewable energies, this new era tapped into a reservoir of coal, petroleum, and natural gas that had been serendipitously stored within the Earth hundreds of millions of years before. This newfound energy source combined with steel and steam to multiply human strength. As before, an abundance allowed for new classes of knowledge workers and a new way of thinking called science, which we represent here with the first law of thermodynamics. In a blink of geologic time, we invented the electronic binary logic gate, upon which is built every computer program and mobile app in use today. Our machines have now advanced to perform many cognitive functions previously exclusive to humans. The experiment continues, with artificial intelligence creeping more and more into the human cognitive sphere, whilst the formation of social networks, enabled by instant worldwide connectivity, can be seen as the development of the collective brain, of the human superorganism. Given the current state of social media, perhaps it's time to see the shrink. As we close our discussion on the current era, we leave open the question of what will be the next key advancement, perhaps to be answered by our great-great-grandchildren. Taken as a whole, our 2-million-year relationship with technology has developed into what Kevin Kelly, co-founder of Wired magazine, calls the technium. Kelly sees technology as a living force, in symbiotic relationship with humans. A relationship in which neither partner can exist, in its present form, without the other. How this relationship evolves, is perhaps the most important factor shaping our human destiny. That concludes our fast forward through our history with the technium. I hope you leave with a better appreciation of the interplay between human and technological progress. From Chesterton, England, this is Professor Arthur Higginbottom. Now, back to you, William.
Thank you, Professor, for your insights and for the great lead into our next discussion on the expansion of the technium, as it continues to transform human activity. Let's first construct the playing field with our 2 dimensions of human abilities, with axis scales ranging from those abilities that are easy to automate to those that are hardest to automate. We can now plot human activities, or jobs, relative to these measures. For example, consider the job of blacksmith, that 150 years ago was a mainstay in every small town. The technium overran this job many years ago, automating much of the physical tasks, and placing advanced cognitive tasks in the hands of the machinist. Not long after, these cognitive tasks were further abstracted, as the role moved from the machinist to the computer numerical control programmers and operators. Today, we see the CNC drills, lathes, and mills being supplanted by 3D printers and a corresponding shift toward the higher cognitive design skills. As we view these job progressions, we are not implying that the technium is an on and off switch, eliminating a job overnight. There are still many artisan blacksmiths plying their trade, and machinists, manufacturing parts for antique cars. Instead, we understand that each job has its own automation curve, some with very long tails that may continue for a very long time. Likewise, the leading edge of the technium is preceded by a frontier of adoption, augmentation, and adaptation. As the technium expands, it may be accelerated by a number of factors. These include labor shortages, as when AI lettuce-picking machines were recently adopted to fill migrant worker shortages in the southwestern United States, or where hydroponic strawberry farms employing robot pickers are being deployed in Japan to replace an aging farming population. We can all attest to the power of disruptors, like the COVID-19 pandemic, rushing in remote work, and further entrenching the e-commerce economy. Likewise, wars, both hot and cold, have brought with them major advances, many of which have peacetime applications. Government subsidies also play a role in accelerating the technium's advance. Consider the boost given to solar power and electric vehicles by tax credits, whose incentives have sped up the adoption and economies of scale of these technologies by years, if not decades. Regulations, or the relaxation thereof, can also free constraints on adoption. Consider the unparalleled growth in U.S. e-commerce, from only 1% in 1999 to 13.6% in 2020. Much of that growth was facilitated by the loosening of sales tax laws for Internet purchases, decreed in the Internet Tax Freedom Act of 1998. And we should not ignore the growth impact of Section 230 of the U.S. Communications Decency Act, passed in 1996, giving immunity to social media companies from content created by third parties using their platforms. Unfortunately, as with many rules, we are now living with the unforeseen consequences of rampant hate speech and falsehoods, which has led in turn to development of new technologies to tackle the massive job of content moderation. On the flip side, there are factors that slow the advance of the technium. These include shortages in expertise in the STEM fields. Regulations can also rein in advancement, as seen in efforts to slow rampant monetization of users' private information, through enforcement of the European General Data Protection Regulation and California's Consumer Privacy Act. The pending European Union policy on artificial intelligence is another attempt to tap the brakes on potentially runaway technologies. Culture and ethical considerations can also suppress the technium's advance. Examples include the anti-vaccine and anti-GMO movements. Even 5G towers came under attack by conspiracy theorists as a cause of COVID-19 infections. Many of these anti-technology movements fall under the broader resistance to GRIN technologies, an acronym for genetic, robotic, information and nanotechnologies. Among ethical concerns are the limitations on the scientific use of human embryo tissues and animal testing, regardless of the altruistic goals of the researchers. Some of these arguments are foolish and some may have merit. Either way, we need fact-based discussions on how to address these issues. There are some who believe that technium expands under its own power, like an airplane in a tailwind. Although difficult to discern from normal market forces, there may be some reality to these claims of self-perpetuation. One such argument is that technology is changing us behaviorally, and those changes in turn foster ever more technological change. Other intrinsic factors may include the unplanned consequences of technology, which in turn require their own solutions. Finally, the emergence of technologies that can reproduce and evolve, independent of humans, would end the debate over if the technium has a life force of its own. Now, let's look closer at a specific case example of the technium's advancement, taking place right now in medical suites across the country. Many of us have reached the milestone of our first colonoscopy, what I like to refer to as the best nap I ever had. Colonoscopies are performed by a gastroenterologist, who carefully navigates a video camera-equipped device, called an endoscope, through the patient's colon in search of possible lesions that could lead to cancer. If such an anomaly is found, the doctor removes it with a loop located at the end of the endoscope. An initial diagnosis is then developed, based on what has been observed. Each step in this process can be mapped to our technium grid and collectively form what we will call a job footprint. The entire process requires attention to detail, and with back-to-back procedures, doctors get tired, possibly causing them to miss something critical during the examination. Enter Medtronics, a company based in Dublin, Ireland, who has trained an artificial intelligent assistant that peers over the doctor's shoulder and highlights what it sees as possible trouble spots in real time. The product, named GI Genius, bases its recommendations on a neural network constructed from 13 million videos of actual colonoscopies, matched to patient outcomes. In this case, GI Genius is not replacing the human doctor. Just navigating the twists and turns of the lower GI tract precludes that capability. Rather, The system is used to augment the doctor's skills in identifying problems, as well as helping develop the initial diagnosis. As we show on this slide, the original job footprint is altered to reflect the impact of the new technology. Before we move on, we also note the creation of an entirely new job, that of training GI Genius to continuously improve its capabilities. Perhaps this phenomenon of technology creating new jobs is another intrinsic force driving the technium forward? We end our discussion with some thoughts on the ability of the human-technium partnership to solve some of our most challenging problems. In a mere 15 years, there will be 9 billion humans on the planet. Will the technium help us feed those hungry mouths? We did it before with mostly physical automation and chemicals during the Green Revolution of the 1960s. Perhaps we can do it again with GMOs and smart farming? Let's hope we don't need to resort to Soylent Green. Now let's swing over to a more cognitive issue. Mental health conditions are increasing worldwide and now cause 1 year of disability, out of every 5 years lived by humans. This is one area the technium can play a pivotal role in solving. We have the worldwide network and the people to train for a massive expansion of mental health services. The emergence of online psychiatric services during COVID-19 is an excellent start. Existential is a big word for concepts that are sometimes too big to contemplate. For the record, the definition of existential is that which is most concerned with existence, especially human existence. The technium is existential, a planet-killing asteroid is existential. Climate management, i.e. keeping the planet habitable, is existential. Fossil fuels were a gift from God to help humans, and the technium build a bridge back to the original fuel, solar power from the sun. We position managing the climate midway on our matrix because, on one hand, much of the solution lay in the physical realm of silicon crystals and power grids. On the other hand, the tougher challenge may be in the cognitive and social spheres as we strive to find the long-term willpower to open the next chapter of humankind. Of course, all progress will come to a halt if we don't end war. Frankly, the prospects of the technium replacing heroes with drones and joysticks is frightening beyond belief. Unfortunately, the military technium complex is well funded, with questionable constraints. The recent attack by a swarm of artificially intelligent drones on Gaza Strip in the Middle East is a warning that we are already on the precipice. Making true peace will require more than robots and artificial intelligence. Possibly, the technium will enable a historical leap in human society on the scale of when agriculture gave birth to civilization. Let us pray we can see beyond our myopic view of our responsibility to future generations, and outrace the dark side of the technium, and ourselves. This concludes our presentation. I hope we turned on a few light bulbs in your mind, and perhaps, opened a new perspective on human-technology coevolution. For the curious, this presentation was developed using Microsoft PowerPoint 365, using object animations, and imported audio with bookmarked animation triggers. Voiceovers were generated using Speech-Allo, a text-to-audio service, employing artificial intelligence to replace human voiceover artists. OpenShot, a free, open-source video editor, was used to produce the final cut. Last, but not least, this presentation was written and produced by Dennis Mulryan with help from his fellow members at Prometheus Endeavor. Thank you. It's been a slice of heaven.